People do not always defend systems because those systems protect them. Sometimes, they defend systems that slowly hurt them. They defend rules that keep them small. They defend leaders who ignore their pain. They defend institutions that humiliate them. They defend stories that make suffering feel normal. This is not simple stupidity. It is a deeper human defense. When a system hurts people for long enough, it does not only shape their lives, it begins to shape their identity. The wound becomes part of the story, and the story becomes difficult to abandon. The first reason is fear. A harmful system may hurt you, but losing it may feel worse. People do not only fear pain, they fear uncertainty, they fear chaos, they fear being alone outside the familiar order, so they defend what they know, even when what they know is harmful. Familiar suffering can feel safer than unknown freedom. That is how the cage begins to feel like home. The system becomes part of daily routine. It tells people what is safe to say. It tells them who to blame. It tells them what not to imagine. After enough time, change no longer feels like rescue. It feels like danger. The second reason is identity. People do not like admitting they were fooled. They do not like admitting they obeyed lies. They do not like admitting they defended cruelty. They do not like admitting their pain had no noble meaning. So the mind protects itself. It says the system must be necessary. It says the sacrifice must have a purpose. It says the suffering proves strength. It says loyalty was wisdom. But sometimes loyalty is only fear with better language. Sometimes endurance becomes a mask for despair. A person is not only defending the system, they are defending the story they used to survive it. If that story breaks, the past becomes unbearable. And truth can hurt more than obedience. The third reason is belonging. Humans are not built to stand alone easily. We need groups. We need recognition. We need people who tell us we are normal. Harmful systems often exploit this need. They do not only punish rebellion, they reward belonging. They offer flags, slogans, rituals, and crowds. They offer enemies to hate together. They offer identity to people who feel invisible. Inside the crowd, doubt becomes lonely. Agreement becomes safety. Repetition becomes belonging. Belonging becomes more important than truth. A person may suffer inside the system, but at least they suffer with others. Leaving may feel like losing a family, even when that family wounds them. The fourth reason is small rewards. Harmful systems rarely hurt everyone equally. They give some people tiny advantages, a safer job, a little status, a small privilege, a feeling of standing above someone else. These rewards do not need to be large, they only need to be enough. Enough to make silence feel practical. Enough to make obedience feel profitable. Enough to make cruelty feel useful. Enough to make the system feel personally valuable. Once someone benefits, the mind begins defending the benefit. Because admitting harm means admitting the benefit is dirty. So people moralize the system. They say the rules are fair. They say victims made bad choices. They say suffering builds character. They say people should simply work harder. This is how privilege disguises itself as morality. It turns advantage into virtue. The fifth reason is learned helplessness. When people resist and nothing changes, something breaks inside them. They stop expecting escape. They stop imagining alternatives. They stop believing their voice matters. They begin adapting to the harm. They learn where not to look. They learn which words not to say. They learn which dreams are dangerous. They lower expectations until pain feels normal. Then a truth teller appears, and instead of feeling saved, they feel threatened. The truth awakens a hope they buried, and buried hope can feel dangerous. This is why people attack those who speak clearly. The speaker reminds them they surrendered. The sixth reason is propaganda. No harmful system survives by force alone. It needs a story. The story says the system is natural. The story says there is no alternative. The story says critics are dangerous. The story says outsiders cannot understand. The story says suffering is the price of order. The story says obedience is maturity. The story says anger should point downward, not at the structure causing the pain. Propaganda redirects suffering away from its source. It gives pain a safer target. It tells people to blame the weaker person nearby. It tells them to blame outsiders. It tells them to blame anyone easier than power. And when people blame the wrong target, the system becomes invisible. The seventh reason is moral exhaustion. Defending truth is tiring. Questioning everything is tiring. Standing apart from the crowd is tiring. Changing your mind is tiring. Admitting harm is tiring. So people choose the easier lie. They say things are not that bad. They say every system has problems. They say nothing can really change. They say people who complain are weak. They say at least there is order. These phrases sound calm, but often they are surrender in disguise. The most frightening part is automatic defense. The system no longer answers criticism. Its victims answer for it. They protect it in conversations. They defend it online. They excuse its cruelty. They mock anyone who wants better. They call hope naive. They call dignity unrealistic. They call freedom dangerous. They call their own shrinking wisdom. This is how harmful systems win, not by convincing everyone they are good, but by making alternatives feel impossible. They turn fear into loyalty. They turn pain into identity. They turn belonging into obedience. They turn exhaustion into acceptance. And they turn survival into moral compromise. The tragedy is not that people are foolish. The tragedy is that people are adaptable. They can adapt to silence. They can adapt to humiliation. They can adapt to unfairness. They can adapt to being watched. They can adapt to being lied to. They can adapt to less and less freedom, and after adapting long enough, they may defend the adaptation itself, because the system taught them to fear the alternative. No harmful system survives through rulers alone. It survives through ordinary participation, through workers who stay quiet, through neighbors who look away, through teachers who repeat the lesson, through clerks who stamp the form, through citizens who say, "This is just how things are," and through crowds that mistake endurance for agreement. This does not make every person equally guilty. Fear is real. Pressure is real. Survival is real. But history still asks painful questions. When does survival become cooperation? When does silence become consent? When does adaptation become defense? And when does defending the system become defending the wound? That is the final truth. People defend harmful systems because those systems enter them. They enter language. They enter memory. They enter identity. They enter fear. They enter belonging. They enter the story people tell about themselves. Once the system lives inside that story, criticism feels personal. It feels like an attack on their sacrifice, their loyalty, their past, their pain, their reason for enduring. That is why harmful systems are hard to break. They are not only outside people, they become part of how people explain their lives. But the moment someone sees the system clearly, something changes. The pain is no longer private failure. The silence is no longer wisdom. The obedience is no longer destiny. The story begins to crack, and through that crack, freedom becomes imaginable again. No harmful system lasts only by force. It lasts by teaching people to defend it. And it begins to weaken when people stop defending the wound, because the wound was never identity. It was only what the system taught them to call themselves.